Hello, everyone. Juxtaposition here for another thrilling day of covering examples of cult rituals. Cult rituals, which is the glue that binds the clandestine services, metaverse, fake simulated false reality. And it makes the merry-go-round in which the private bankers practice their money laundering. It makes that merry-go-round um, orbit smoothly with no squeaky sounds. It's the grease on the axis of the private banking, money laundering merry-go-round, which we all learn to worship at the altar of the banks. Okay, so today I'm wearing my snazzy helmet from Bell. I've worn Bell helmets for many years, and Bell is always welcome to sponsor my show. Just please make a comment on my page and let me know how I can receive your cash money, and we'll feature Bell products on the show. Thanks so much for watching, and let's get busy with some examples of cult rituals. And I got to give some credit to Sean Stone because I did an 80 minute interview with Sean Stone earlier in 2022. And Sean was very, very focused on cults and cult rituals. And he wanted me to tell him about the cremation of care ceremony at the Bohemian Grove, which I personally have not participated in. However, I know people who have. And I've been to the owl, and yes, indeed, there is a 40-foot cement owl at the Bohemian Grove in Monterey, right on a bluff above the Russian River, which you could see if you were on a kayak or a canoe and you knew the coordinates. And you have to position yourself just so to the north to be able to get a look at the Moloch owl. I personally climbed into the owl, which is a ginormous fireplace. If you didn't know, they light fires at the feet of the owl, the feet that are the little claws that are grabbing hold of the spider, right? The motto of the Bohemian Grove is "Come not here, ye weaving spiders." That's the motto of the Bohemian Grove. Spiders represent, I guess, women and relationships and commitments and what they consider to be entrapments of life, catching you into the web of the spider. So the owl eats spiders, you see. That's the point of the Bohemian Grove. They don't like webs. They don't like entanglements, which, of course, is the height of hypocrisy, because if you are in a cult and you go to a men's only club in the middle of a rainforest, light a fire in the fireplace known as the Moloch Owl, wear robes, and chant with Walt Disneyland narration voices. That's who did most of the narrations on the cremation of care ceremony. It was done by the same voice that you'd hear if you did a trip on the Haunted Mansion in Disneyland in Anaheim, Orange County. The voice that's in the Haunted Mansion, it's the same voice that narrates the cremation of care ceremonies. Now, I have the script for that, and I could read it, but it will creep you out big time. So who knew that a child's playground known as Disneyland would actually be the voice of the Bohemian Grove in the last week of July every year, where these grown men get together to chant about getting rid of those evil spiders. It's sort of a version of the Wizard of Oz. It really is, only you don't have the Wicked Witch of the East and the Wicked Witch of the West, because they have a no women rule at the Bohemian Club. So there are no women there. So that got me to thinking, I was a lot younger when I spent time at the Bohemian Club and the Bohemian Grove. Perhaps I was being groomed, I don't know. But I was a young man, and most of the men were my age that I am today. And so I just thought it was odd that there were no women voices anywhere to be seen in the clubhouse in San Francisco at 624 Taylor Street, which is below Nob Hill, in close proximity to the Freemasonry Auditorium, the Masonic Auditorium, which is just a couple blocks up the hill from the Bohemian Clubhouse. I've been to the basement, the windowless basement. They have an amphitheater set up down there. You know, it's got a stage, and it has seats just like a cinema might. And they have a pit for the orchestra pit. And there I met George Shultz, Secretary of State, former president of Bechtel Corporation, a member of the Hoover Institute, who had a home on Stanford University campus, where he died a few years ago on the Stanford campus. I met him. I met Caspar Weinberger, who was his executive vice president, legal counsel for Bechtel Corporation, and then, of course, Department of Defense, member of the Ronald Reagan cabinet, along with George Shultz, who was named as the State Department chief, which is CIA by another name, the State Department. It means you're in charge of CIA housing throughout the world, because every United States Embassy, State Department property, which of course is exempt from, local laws of a sovereign nation, it follows its own admiralty law policy, and you should know that it's basically a CIA installation in country under the guise that they perform some ambassador embassy functions, which I'm here to tell you, there's no such thing. There's no such thing as ambassadors. What there are is cover stories for CIA Spooksville operations worldwide. It's an international command and control, pacification and control network under the guise that it has something to do with diplomacy. It has nothing to do with diplomacy. And if you don't believe me, go ask the people that work in the United States Embassy in Saigon. Ask them about sovereignty and sovereign rights during the Tet Offensive, okay? Because I think that was where we established the truth. And the truth was that the CIA got their head handed to them during the month of February 1968. And the next month we had the My Lai Massacre. That was kind of a cult ritual of retribution, terrorism, and of course William Colby showing you what he can do. William Colby. All right, so let me give you I want to get these. I've got a bunch of examples of cult ritual, because not everything has to do with lighting a fire in a cement concrete owl and chanting to a Walt Disney narrated voice regarding cremation of care and the destruction of those evil weaving spiders. But I want to take the case of John Frankenheimer, who was the Hollywood director of the Manchurian Candidate, which was released in 1962. And the reason I'm bringing that up is we had Angela Lansbury pass away, a couple days ago at age 96. And of course, the media didn't miss a beat to connect her with Charlie Manson and how she rescued her daughter from the clutches of Charlie Manson and moved away from California. I believe they moved to England, back to England. That's how far you got to go to get away from a guy with no job, no bank account, okay, no home, but he does live in CBS properties, like Will Rogers' hunting lodge in Pacific Palisades, like the porn capital of the world in Canoga Park, in close proximity to the CBS set known as the George Spahn Ranch. Charlie was a couple miles away from there. He was 1 mile away from the Peter Grossman Burn Center, aka Cosmetic Surgery Hospital, that we want to rename Burn Center in case you have an Anne Heche fiery car crash, right? So my point is that John Frankenheimer went through ROTC Air Force and found himself out in Chatworth area near the Sepulveda recreation facility where Francis Gary Powers was eventually murdered. And that is very close proximity to where the so-called Manson girls were housed in 3 houses with 2 swimming pools on Chandler Boulevard at 13158 Chandler Boulevard. Well, that's where John Frankenheimer more or less ended up in that zip code in Van Nuys, Chatworth. And he learned about film and editing and got to direct some television shows, and then they moved him over to film. And he affiliated with United Artists, which is code for MGM. because United Artists has no studios, people. That's why you got to be real careful when we talk about Hollywood, because 90% of Hollywood doesn't really exist. They're all hedge fund brokers to funnel the money laundering through to eventually CBS, who controls radio, music, television through the FCC licenses, and has Columbia Pictures, so they have studios, and they have television studios, and they have film studios, and they also have, we have MGM, which is who Sharon Tate signed a 7-year contract with them, and they have studios, MGM Studios, and you have Sony Pictures, who took over a lot of the studios from MGM. So there are Hollywood names that you'd recognize that actually have studio lots, and like Paramount Pictures, for example, which is owned by Gulf and Western and had Henry Kissinger on its board at the time that Roman Polanski was working there, at the time that Sharon Tate was murdered, at the time that Bob Evans was a lowly vice president, way down the food chain. And but most of Hollywood operates under broker names, under shadow names, under straw subsidiary names. Names like Manson International, which was created by CBS, Columbia Pictures, Columbia Broadcasting System created a subsidiary called Manson International so they can get into the porn business and alternative film and publishing of magazines. Because the porn business in 1950s was mostly dirty magazines and little loops that they provided for those greasy theaters. And Columbia Pictures, of course, wanted to be involved in that, but they didn't want their name associated with it, so they created Manson International. No relation to Charlie Manson at all. We already had a Manson cult leader called CBS, and that was in 1953 that Manson International was created. It eventually got morphed into Carol Co. Pictures, with Mario Kassar and Andras Weidman, who changed his name to Andrew Vajna. Not that different than Oliver Stone, whose father's name is Louis Silverstein. So Oliver Stone is really Oliver Silverstein, but we know him as Oliver Stone because he changed his name, or his father changed the name for his son, who could have a Hollywood career working with people like Terry Semel, working with people like Mario Kassar, working with people like Andrew Vajna, a.k.a. Andras Weidman, working with the people who are the managers of the Hollywood studios and the subsidiary entities like Caballero Home Video, which is a pornographer owned by Noam Bloom and sold to Carol Co. Pictures, which is really Manson International. So if you haven't figured it out in my videos, this all goes to money laundering. It goes to the concealment of the sources and uses of money. Warner Brothers and Columbia Broadcasting System and Disney Studios and Paramount Pictures, aka Gulf and Western, they don't want you to know who's doing what and how much porn they're all doing and how much money they're making on it and how they control virtually 100% of all the contractors and all the employees of all the Hollywood related liaison partners, how they're all 100% controlled. And they were controlled via Occult. And John Frankenheimer found himself, perhaps through no fault of his own, he thought he was getting into the Air Force. Next thing he knows, he's a director of the Manchurian Candidate, which, if you didn't know, that's a CIA, MK Ultra documentary about how you control the mind of a military man coming out of the United States participation in Korea during the Korean War. And this is played by Lawrence Harvey, who was 31 years old at the time. His mother, who's his control agent, CIA, is played by Angela Lansbury, who paradoxically was only 36 years old at this time. She had a 9-year-old daughter named Deidre. So if you can imagine Angela Lansbury at age 36 with a 9-year-old daughter, Deidre, and she plays the mother of Lawrence Harvey, who's 31 years old. It's only a 5-year age difference, right? But they did that before with Angela Lansbury. They did it with an Elvis Presley movie, Aloha from Hawaii, or what was it called? Blue Hawaii, I think it was, where she played Elvis Presley's mother, even though Elvis Presley and Angela Lansbury are not that different in age. So she's done that before. But I'm going to stay on John Frankenheimer. I'm going to loop back to Angela Lansbury again, because Angela Lansbury participated in many cult rituals during her very long, decades-long career in British entertainment and Hollywood television, Hollywood film. You cannot escape the cult rituals, people. It doesn't matter if your name's Angela Lansbury, or if your name is Bob Evans, or if your name is Roy Radin, or if your name is, let me get a good name for you here. If your name is Doris Day, if your name is Brian Wilson, if your name is Neil Young, if your name is Joe Rogan, if your name is Howard Stern, if your name is anything to do with politics, if your name is Jerry Brown, if your name is Linda Ronstadt, if your name is John Phillips, if your name is Natalie Wood, you cannot escape the cult. All right? I mean, you can try to get away. It looks like Tippi Hedren might have. So this is a clue for Dakota Johnson. Get out of town. Go to your grandmother's zoo, exotic zoo, and get the heck out of Hollywood. Otherwise, you're going to end up like Natalie Wood or Sharon Tate or Marilyn Monroe, right? Or Susan Hayward, Judy Garland, Cass Elliot. Don't do it. Janis Joplin, don't go down that road. All right, so The Manchurian Candidate was a very disturbing film. It was followed up immediately with 7 Days in May. Let me read you a little bit about 7 Days in May. 7 Days in May is not as iconic, not as well known. And however, it's every bit as creepy. 7 Days in May is a 1964 American political thriller film. It's not that different than Manchurian Candidate. It's about a military political cabal which plans a takeover of the United States government in reaction to the president's negotiation of a disarmament treaty with the Soviet Union. Now, that had already been tried with Dwight David Eisenhower attempted to have his crusade for peace in Paris, where he was going to have a disarmament treaty signed. That was torpedoed through the Francis Gary Powers fake shootdown, which occurred on May Day, which is May 1st, 1960. And that is where Gary Powers safely landed his plane, which conked out about 200 miles from Moscow, and he landed safely in a farm field. But the media reported it as the evil Russians shot down Gary Powers with a surface-to-air missile. That's a mendacity. It's not true. It's fake history. And of course, Tom Hanks and Steven Spielberg have done a film, Bridge of Spies, which celebrates the fake history, the fakeness of a spy pilot who was shot down. We know it's that Gary Powers didn't get shot down. There's two proofs. Number one is Gary Powers survived. He didn't get killed. And believe me, if you got hit by a rocket at 80,000 feet, you'd be dead. It's almost impossible to parachute out of a U-2 spy plane, even under controlled conditions. It's almost impossible. Number two, he had 13 pieces of personal identification that were found under his seat cushion. His California driver's license, his lodge card, because he was a Freemason, okay? And they found the picture of his wife and his Air Force credentials. Okay, I'm just telling you, if you're a spy pilot flying an SR-71 or a U-2 spy plane, you carry a grand total of no personal identification with you. So the only way that you would know and the only way that you would find identification under a seat cushion is if the CIA put it there, not the pilot, but the CIA controllers of the pilot put it there, and didn't blow up the plane. Because if the plane got blown up, you're not going to find the California driver's license, okay? You're not going to find Francis Gary Powers either, because he would be blown into a million pieces. All right, so we know that he didn't get shot down by the Soviet Union, but that's a mendacity that's gone on for 70 years, and, it is what it is. So Well, let's just say it's a 62-year-old mendacity. So John Frankenheimer, after coming up with this idea of the 7 days of May, which is partially true and it's partially false. The truth is that yes, the military does control our government, okay, because of all Lockheed and General Dynamics and Halliburton, which is Brown and Root. And they do control our government because our government doesn't exist. We have no sovereignty. We don't really have a Congress. We don't have a Senate. We don't have a Supreme Court. Those are just, veneer. That's the Wizard of Oz curtain. That's the curtain. But when you pull the curtain back, you've got a banker on a stepladder. And that's what we have. We have the banker on the stepladder, and he hires the CIA military in order to carry out directives that are decided by little old man at the Bohemian Grove or at some private facility with no women in the room. And so John Frankenheimer got it half right. Yeah, there's a military structure to the government. But the part he got wrong is that you'd have to assassinate the president in order to gain control. Because, of course, the president has no control. Joe Biden's not in control. I don't even think he's in control of his bowels, let alone anything to do with the military. I mean, they just do whatever they want, pursuant to the bank's directive, because they report to the highest authority, as Alan Dulles told the media right after the Gary Powers incident, when the media smarty pantses used to ask smarty pants questions back in 1960, and they said, hey, didn't you get the President Eisenhower's directive, no flyovers, no spy plane flyovers during the month of May 1960? And Alan Dulles very arrogantly quipped on the stairs to his home, I can assure you that I report to the highest authority, meaning not the President Dwight Eisenhower, meaning the banks, the people who pay his salary, the bankers. All right, so John Frankenheimer ends up living at the Malibu gated colony, okay, right off Pacific Coast Highway 1. And that's kind of a cult ritual. I mean, to live in a gated prison, which is what that is. These gated facilities with no sidewalks, even though it's gated, they still don't have sidewalks in the Malibu colony. That if you're not sure that you're in a prison, just look around and see if you have sidewalks or not. Because they don't have sidewalks in the county jail, and they don't have sidewalks in federal prison, and they don't have sidewalks in gated colonies like the Malibu gated colony. So you can't even walk your dog in these multi-million-dollar homes inside the gate. Now, you should also know that there's a minimum of 2 gates to get in there, and one has the sentries, the guards, and the other one doesn't. It has trash cans. It's where the trash night, where they put the trash cans out. And that one doesn't have any guards. And you could definitely sneak in through that gate. It's absolutely possible to do that. However, they have security cameras throughout the entire Malibu colony. So you couldn't go 15 seconds in the Malibu colony unless you'll appear on a flat screen, probably in the guardhouse at the main gate. They probably have another facility in there. They have 13 tennis courts in the Malibu colony. The last I counted, they had 13. And they're almost never used. So you got plenty of available tennis courts. I don't know what Johnny Carson would need his own tennis court for. He had 13 tennis courts to choose from when he lived in there. And anyway, be that as it may, John Frankenheimer moves in there with the ocean view position property, because there are homes that don't have the ocean. You have to use the easement or get in your car, drive out of the gate, and go to the beach. So there's ways to navigate around, but it's not easy to do because they really are discouraging tourism in these gated communities. And by the way, there's other gated communities in Malibu toward Point Dume that don't get any press at all. Noam Bloom, the purveyor of porn, lived in one of those places. Again, no sidewalks and no access to the public, and you had a sentry guardhouse, and but it's on the east side or the north side of Highway 1, Pacific Coast Highway. In other words, not on the beach. It's set back from the beach. It's up on the hill. So mostly people don't notice it. But Barbara Streisand had some property over there. It's referred to as Ramirez Canyon, Ramirez Creek Canyon, Ramirez Mesa Drive. It's Point Doom, Birdview Drive area, zip code. It's near the beach, it's just not on the beach. John Frankenheimer's in there, and he's a big star in Hollywood. And then somebody taps him on the shoulder and suggests that he host Robert Kennedy when Robert Kennedy had to visit California for the California primary, which would have been on Tuesday, June 4th, 1968, when he's going to run for United States president, which sounds absurd given that his brother was killed in a military coup, not different than 7 Days in May, directed by John Frankenheimer. Do you see the irony here, people? Don't you think it's a cult ritual when your name is John Frankenheimer and you direct a movie, Manchurian Candidate, about CIA mind control of political assassinations, and that's being filmed when your brother is president, John Kennedy, and then the next year, the year after Manchurian Candidate has been released, your brother has his head blown off in a military coup, which is immediately followed in 1964 by a film directed by John Frankenheimer entitled 7 Days in May, a military coup from a secret cabal, bank financed. And your name is Robert Kennedy. You were the attorney general that rounded up over 1,800 mafia drug dealers in direct violation of CIA orders. And you're going to run for president? I mean, is the mafia mad at Robert Kennedy? Yeah, sure they are. Who's more angry than the mafia? The CIA. Because the CIA employs the mafia. The five families in New York run through Franklin National Bank on Long Island with Michele Sindona as the private banker. That is a CIA operation. You know, notice they did murder Michele Sindona, who was the president of that bank and personal friends with Roberto Calvi. They whacked him too in 1982, and they whacked the president of the banker for the 5 organized families in New York. He got whacked in 1986. But before that, we had John Frankenheimer, and he hosts Robert Kennedy at his home in the Malibu colony, right? And he's the Hollywood director that basically laid the blueprint for John Kennedy's murder. Why would Robert Kennedy go to Malibu? I mean, he could have gone to the Jose Menendez kill house because that was home to Michael Jackson and Elton John, and then Jose and Kitty Menendez for a few months. Why didn't Robert Kennedy go to that house, 722 North Elm Drive? Or perhaps he could have gone to Elvis Presley's home at 1174 Hillcrest Road in the Truesdale Estates. Could have gone there because Elvis only was in that house maybe 5-6 months a year. So this is June 1968. Maybe the home was available. Elvis could have made that home available. Or maybe Robert Kennedy could have stayed at Cielo Drive, right? Because just Doris Day's son was apparently living there, you know. So he could have stayed at Cielo Drive, you know, the murder scene for Sharon Tate. This is the year before. The summer of 1968. He could have stayed at Cielo Drive, right? We know that's a military surveillance home. He could have stayed at Walt Disney's Carrollwood Drive home right down the hill from the Cielo Drive murder scene. He could have stayed there. He could have stayed in the Timothy Leary home at 10106 Sunbrook Drive. That's at the murder scene at Cielo, but it's down the ice plant from it. He could have stayed in that house. And by the way, you know, that's going to save 20 minutes to 30 minutes of driving time to get to the Ambassador Hotel. So you could get over to your murder site a lot quicker from Benedict Canyon or Beverly Hills than you could from Malibu, where you have to go past Pacific Palisades and the Charlie Manson residence where Charlie's living at 14400 Sunset Boulevard, 5.88 acres of the Will Rogers Hunting Lodge. You have to drive past that residence in order to get over to Wilshire Boulevard. You know, you go past where O.J. Simpson used to live. You go past where Marilyn Monroe was murdered. You go right past there. You know, Robert Kennedy knows about that. He knows a lot more about Marilyn Monroe than he did about Charlie Manson, right? Got to go past that. It's got to go all the way down Wilshire Boulevard, damn near to where Lena LaBianca gets killed in Silver Lake. He got to go way down Wilshire Boulevard. There's a lot of stoplights, and to get to the Ambassador Hotel, where he's murdered, after midnight on June 5th. Again, early hours of the morning, not different than Sharon Tate, not different than Abigail Folger, just the wee hours of the next day, which in Robert Kennedy's case would have been a Wednesday morning. And then he doesn't technically die until 1:44 a.m. in the wee hours of Thursday morning. But he's shot on June 5th, Wednesday. And John Frankenheimer drives Robert Kennedy to his death in his Rolls-Royce Silver Cloud III limousine. That's a cult ritual. He's living in a cult colony called Malibu Colony, gated. He's hosting Robert Kennedy, which is totally inappropriate. John Frankenheimer is 38 years old. Robert Kennedy is 42 years old. John Frankenheimer hosts a Last Supper for Robert Kennedy, which has Roman Polanski and Sharon Tate on the guest list, amongst other Hollywood insiders. Then he drives Robert Kennedy, who preferred to stay where he was in Malibu and have the news media interview him for his victory speech or his defeat concession speech, whichever. And it turned out it was a close race, and it came down to the wire, and it really wasn't known until just before midnight on Tuesday night that Robert Kennedy was going to win the California primary and give his victory speech, which he did, a little after midnight. Then he walks through the pantry into the kitchen, where he's killed by the man who's escorting him, the security guard from the Ambassador Hotel, Thane Eugene Caesar, who's standing on Robert Kennedy's right elbow, and he's shot behind his right ear from the man who's holding his right elbow, Thane Eugene Caesar, who works for Lockheed Skunk Works in Burbank, the highest security department of Lockheed, which is a military contractor, as depicted in 7 Days of May, a military cabal. It's hard to tell it's the military when it's a corporation, right? But I'm telling you, all these big corporations are military setup in terms of rank, centralized, compartmentalized to minimize whistleblowing, security clearances, need-to-know basis. In other words, the corporations are set up identical to any military platoon, division, army, infantry group. So what I'm telling you is that there's no difference. The corporations are the military, and that applies to the pharmaceutical industry as well. So John Frankenheimer hosts a person that really he shouldn't be hosting, Robert Kennedy, and Robert Kennedy shouldn't want to stay at his home. But it happens. So I think that Robert Kennedy is following the cult ritual, and so is John Frankenheimer. Then John Frankenheimer insists on driving him to Wilshire Boulevard to the Ambassador Hotel in a Rolls-Royce Silver Cloud III. If that isn't a procession of death, a death cult, it's sort of like saying I'm going to wear a face diaper and I'm going to get it boosted as many times as Dr. Fauci tells me. That's a death cult. In other words, you have a death wish. To me, that's analogous to when I was in high school and I used to see the cigarette smoke emanating from behind the swimming pool where the drug dealers were from my high school. They all hung out between 7 o'clock in the morning and 8 o'clock to sell drugs behind the swimming pool at my high school. And what do you think the probability is that I'm going to go over there and buy drugs from these people? They don't know where the drugs come from. They get it from their supplier. But there were kids that would go over and buy marijuana, LSD, amphetamines, mushrooms. They had a whole catalog of products, but they had no quality. They had no beta testing. They had no FDA approved research, no clinical trials. It's hit or miss. You could be buying oregano. You don't know what you're buying over there, right? And do I look like the kind of person that needs to buy drugs at 7 o'clock in the morning? I'm already have lots of energy. I don't need any amphetamines to go take my algebra and calculus courses. But there were kids at my high school that went over there, and I see them as face diaper zombies. In other words, you can tell them that it'll take you to the moon and back, and they'll buy it. And to me, that's a death cult, because they could sell you arsenic, and they can sell you strychnine poison, and they can sell you cyanide pills over there. And that's what I think about that. So, to sum up, John Frankenheimer ended up moving out of the colony. You know who bought his home? Tom Hanks. In May 1991, Tom Hanks moved into the John Frankenheimer home, the home that hosted the Last Supper for Robert Kennedy, the home that hosted Roman Polanski and Sharon Tate's fake marriage in this gated community. Tom Hanks moves in. And remember, Tom Hanks became the spokesman for Hollywood as the first legitimate film star to get the deadly coronavirus. Then allegedly he didn't die, but he disappeared, never to be seen again. Last he was seen is in Sydney, Australia, and we've never seen him since. They have rolled out a photograph of him in an In-N-Out burger. Turns out that was Photoshop from 2018, so that was a fake photo. His Elvis Presley Colonel Parker movie finally came out, delayed, over 18-month delay, and he is not going around promoting that thing. There is apparently a Tom Hanks body double, but he doesn't talk much, doesn't speak much. Most everything you've seen on Tom Hanks the last 2.5 years has been in the can. He doesn't talk about current events. He doesn't talk about the coronavirus, which got renamed the COVID-19 deadly flu. And doesn't talk about vaccines, because there was no vaccine when he disappeared, right? Or the vax, whatever you want to call it. I wouldn't call it a vaccine. We know it's not. It's not a vaccine. So that's the John Frankenheimer situation. Hosts a party, a dinner party, hosts Robert Kennedy, personally escorts Robert Kennedy to his death at the Ambassador Hotel. Those are 3 cult rituals that John Frankenheimer performed. He ends up dying at age 72, kind of early. All right, let's take the example of Natalie Wood. Remember little Natalie Wood, who first appeared in a speaking role on the big screen with Orson Welles in Tomorrow is Forever. Okay, and that was in 1946. Natalie Wood was 8 years old, and in the movie Tomorrow is Forever. But we know that tomorrow is not forever, because Natalie Wood was thrown into the chilly waters at Santa Catalina Island by somebody off her boat, the Splendor, at around 2 o'clock in the morning on November 29th, 1981, which was a Sunday morning in the wee hours, kind of sort of like Sharon Tate got murdered. Just kind of like sort of Robert Kennedy got murdered in the wee hours. Only in the case of Robert Kennedy, it was the wee hours of Wednesday morning, June 5th. In the case of Sharon Tate, it was the wee hours of Saturday morning, August 9th. In the case of Natalie Wood, it was the wee hours of Sunday morning, November 29th, 1981. And Natalie Wood's real name is Natasha Zakharenko, kind of a Russian spy name after her Russian immigrant parents, who probably work with the OSS and the KGB. That would be my assumption, because that's who goes into Hollywood. That's how Sharon Tate got into Hollywood. She got into Hollywood because her father worked for the CIA. He was a colonel in Army intelligence, Paul James Tate. And he was friends with William Colby, who had 5 children, one whom died in a mysterious fashion, leaving 4. 2 daughters and 2 sons. And one of his sons, Carl, ends up in the O.J. Simpson trial. Yeah, at the preliminary hearing and again at the murder trial, because he's next door neighbors with Nicole Brown, one of the murder victims, who was killed in an Operation Gladio by the sword type murder. The O.J. Simpson murder trial that murdered Ron Goldman and Nicole Brown Simpson. And Carl Colby lived at the crime scene. He lived 150 feet away from the murder scene. Right? He's CIA. He's the son of the director of the CIA. You can't get any closer than that, people. That's very cult ritual. When you're murdering people, next door to the CIA, to the director of the CIA's son's house, it sounds kind of, You think that that would be an accident? They have surveillance cameras on that easement near Gretna Green and Bundy. They have surveillance cameras over there. Oh yeah, I saw it in a Columbo episode. I saw it in a Cannon episode. They used to show surveillance cameras and listening devices throughout the Barnaby Jones series, throughout the Cannon series, through the Columbo series. That's the CIA telling you. That was in the 70s. And the Nicole Brown Simpson murders was in the 1990s. You think they didn't improve in 20 years on their surveillance systems? Oh yeah, they did. Now we have Amazon Ring cameras in every neighborhood, not just CIA operation neighborhoods, every neighborhood. Then we have Elton John. Elton John moved into 722 North Elm Drive, which we now know is a cult ritual home for the murder of Jose Enrique Menendez and his lovely wife, Kitty Menendez, who got shotgun blasted in this home that Elton John lived in. Elton John ended up moving into the Truesdale Estates near Elvis Presley. And that's a cult ritual because the home that Elton John remodeled has 10 bedrooms and 22 bathrooms. It's for 2 gay men, and I believe they have 2 children. It says 4 people live in that house. And you got 22 bathrooms? 22 bathrooms. 15 Robert Mapplethorpe photographs hang on the walls of the Elton John Truesdale estate, with silver mylar ceiling that reflects light off the Robert Mapplethorpe photos. Elton likes to say that he celebrates life there, but there's no women in that home. I don't know how you can have life with no women. I don't think it's possible. And here's the deal, people. The reason there's 22 bathrooms in this Elton John home in Beverly Hills, which is 1.9 miles away from the Jose Menendez murder scene where Elton John used to live, it's 1.9 miles to his new home in the Truesdale Estates, which is off Caldwater Canyon and Sunset Boulevard, near the Birds, the neighborhood of the Birds. And it's between Laurel Canyon and Franklin Canyon, Coldwater Canyon. It's nestled in between, so it's in very close proximity to the Disney Studios Lookout Mountain facility, which is just above this Elton John home. It's actually just above it. And I should tell you that it has 22 bathrooms because Elton John is required. He is required to host an Academy Awards viewing party every year. Okay? Because that's not Elton John's idea. He's told, if you're gonna, this is where you're gonna live, and we're gonna put 22 bathrooms in there because you're gonna have 100 people over to your home to watch the Academy Awards. These are the people that don't go to the Dolby Theater in West Hollywood. You know, where the Will Smith fake bitch slap of Chris Rock happened. You know, where the Magic Castle is. You know, where Ashley Ellerin got bayoneted 47 times to death, where Janis Joplin was murdered by an overdose at the Magic Castle, across the street from the Magic Castle. The Dolby Theaters are across the street from the Magic Castle to the south. That if Elton John is not getting an award at the Academy Awards, he can host a party in the Truesdale Estate, allegedly in his home. But you know what? This home in the Truesdale Estate is as much as Elton John's home, who already has a home in Atlanta, in Buckhead, Atlanta, and he's got homes throughout the world. I'm sure he's got a home in England. So he doesn't really need a home in Beverly Hills. But this is for the Academy Awards cult ritual viewing for overflow guests. And it's as much of Elton John's house as the John Franklin ownership of Cielo Drive, where Sharon Tate was murdered. He doesn't own that home, right? Those are provisional homes. That's provisional housing. That's like saying John Frankenheimer owns the home in the Malibu Colony. That's like saying Tom Hanks took it over. No, it was just reassigned to Tom Hanks. It was assigned to John Frankenheimer when he was active in Hollywood. Then it was reassigned to Tom Hanks when he is active in Hollywood. The Elton John home will be reassigned to some other Netflix star someday. That's why Elvis Presley had 4 different homes. 2 in Bel Air and 2 in Beverly Hills. But he lived, for the most part, he lived at the Truesdale Estate property, 1174 Hillcrest Road. That was the estate that I think he spent the most years in. And that's where he was living when Sharon Tate was murdered. This is about 3.5 miles from the crime scene is where Elvis lived. And the Elton John, Kitty Menendez home, 2.5 miles from the Sharon Tate crime scene. Anyway, provisional housing and provisional parties that you're required to host, that's a cult ritual. Another example, Oliver Silverstein visited Timothy Leary, who's living at 10106 Sunbrook Drive, which is a cul-de-sac. And it's at the Sharon Tate murder scene. It's right down the hill. I mean, I could run up that hill in less than 30 seconds, and you'd be where Abigail Folger was bayoneted 28 times. So Timothy Leary required to live on a staging property to a murder scene. That's a cult requirement of obedience. Oliver Stone visiting him on St. Patrick's Day, which is a Sunday, on March 17th, 1996, that is a cult ritual of obedience for Oliver Silverstein at age 51 to go visit Timothy Leary, age 75, who's dying of prostate cancer and will be dead within 60 days. William Colby is going to be dead within 35, 36 days of Oliver Stone's visit. William Colby, who's an obedient soldier of the CIA, 50 plus years working with OSS CIA, and he gets whacked in his kitchen at the Rock Point, Maryland fishing cabin in his kitchen. He's disappeared for 9 days, then magically, like Houdini, reappeared. So it's hard to know when he was killed. I believe he was killed in his kitchen at 8:45 p.m. on April 27th, 1996, just a few weeks after Oliver Stone visited Timothy Leary, who's a CIA employee. That makes Oliver Stone a CIA liaison partner in my book, because there's no reason to take time out on a Sunday afternoon to go visit a LSD, mind control, tune in, turn on, drop out criminal by the name of Irish Catholic criminal by the name of Timothy Leary. And there goes Oliver Stone, a Buddhist Jewish fellow, to give him a get well card. That's completely cult ritual, people. And to answer Sean Stone's question about the Bohemian Grove, look, anytime you have a party with hundreds of men and no women, and you light a fire and you chant about weaving spiders, come not here, I just put myself in that position. If I'm in my 50s or 60s or 70s, what do you think that the motivation is going to be for me to go to a hijinks night in San Francisco in the basement of the Bohemian Club and watch entertainment and an orchestra play with no women? It's zero. I'm not interested in going to an all-men party. I have no interest in it. It's creepy. It's stupid. I don't care if George Shultz is there. I don't care if Casper Weinberg is there. Phil Harris was there. My God, he was partners with Jack Benny for CBS Radio. He was there. I don't care. I'd prefer to be at a party that has, women, all right? So I think the whole thing is a cult ritual because, and I don't think they voluntarily go to these parties. I think that if George Shultz didn't go to that party, he would get in trouble. They would have to scandalize him. And they have a dossier this thick on George Shultz and Casper Weinberger, right? And Henry Kissinger. And we know they have one on Alan Dershowitz. And we know they have one on, Richard Nixon, although his was a little thinner. So they had to conjure up a whole fake burglary. Like, who cares about burglarizing the Democratic National Re-Election Committee? Nobody cares. There's nothing important going on over there. Give me a break. The other thing that's creepy is William Link, who's the executive producer and major screenwriter for the Columbo series, my favorite Howdy Do It series, because it's not a whodunit, it's a Howdy Do It series. William Link moves into the Jose Menendez crime scene, murder scene after the murder. And that's called ritual. Would you personally want to move into a home where two people got shotgun blasted 13 times? I wouldn't. Would you want to move on to the property that Sharon Tate was murdered in, like Jeff Franklin did? I wouldn't. Would you want to live in the home down the ice plant from that, like Timothy Leary did? I wouldn't. Why would Timothy Leary do that? Why would Oliver Stone go visit him there? Why? And then maybe not mention it to his son, Sean, who was 11 years old. Don't you think, hey, Sean, I went over to the Sharon Tate murder scene today. Are you interested? I don't know if that conversation ever happened, right? That's really cult ritual all the way. So, Sean, I hope I answered your question, right? You're asking about cult rituals. Well, ask your father, because he's the chairman of the board of the cult ritual. Go visit people on St. Patrick's Day and give them get well cards, even though they're going to die of cancer. You know, I tell you to go talk to John Frankenheimer, but he's dead. You know, you can't talk to Natalie Wood. You can't talk to Sharon Tate. You can't talk to Abigail Folger, whose mother lived to age 100. Abigail Folger's private banking, money laundering mother lived to 100 before she could join her daughter at the Holy Cross Catholic Cemetery to be interred next to her daughter, who died at age 25. And the mother lives 4 times longer and has her funeral at St. Ignatius Parish, right next door to the Lone Mountain Campus for Women and the University of San Francisco Jesuit University. And that's where Abigail Folger's mother had her funeral services, right across the road from the Sharon Meadow, named after a banker, where Timothy Leary uttered the words, "Tune in, turn on, drop out" in 1967. And that is where Abigail Folger's mother had her funeral. And that is where Abigail Folger was the money launderer banker for Timothy Leary, for Hunter S. Thompson, for Louis Jolion West, CIA, MK Ultra psychiatrist, the private banker for Bill Graham, also known as Wolf Grudjanka, a Russian Jew. She was private bankers for Jim Jones and set up his People's Temple at 1849 Geary Boulevard, which shared a wall with Fillmore Auditorium, which was turned over to Bill Graham once they eliminated George Sullivan with a bullet through the head on August 1st, 1967, the summer of love. Love unless your name is George Sullivan. Then it's a cult ritual of death. And so what I'm trying to tell you is this face diaper, what is now the face diaper cult, is a death cult. It's a death spiral cult. As long as you contribute to the nefarious and satanic activities of the cult, you can continue to live in a nice home, perhaps in the Malibu Colony, perhaps in Benedict Canyon, perhaps in the Truesdale Estates, perhaps in Laurel Canyon. But as soon as you stop coming into the office, which is what encourages these older men to go to the cremation and care ceremonies, because if they're afraid that since there's a log kept of everyone's attendance, there's an attendance sheet, that if you don't go to the hijinks night at the clubhouse and you don't go to the Grove and you don't wear your robe and chant to the cremation of care and you don't go to the Knickerbocker Club and you don't go to the Brookes Institute cocktail parties, if you don't attend these required events, then you can get whacked or go to sleep and not wake up. And with 5G towers basically everywhere, anyone can be silenced at any moment. That's my story for today. I hope you enjoyed it. Oh, one last thing. Angela Lansbury, forgot about her. So she moves her Murder, She Wrote television series to Cabot Cove, which is in Mendocino County on the coast, right? It's supposed to duplicate Maine, but it's really expensive to do television production shows with the weather up in Maine. It's really bad. So the weather in the winter is spectacular in Mendocino County. And her television show debuts 1984 to 1996. So it's a 12-year run for Murder, She Wrote. Angela Lansbury, whose daughter Deetra was a member of the Manson family, which never existed in real life. Anyway, what I wanted to tell you is Mendocino wasn't a choice that Angela Lansbury made, and it wasn't a choice that the production facility made based on economics. It was based on that's a CIA colony, people. Mendocino County. Okay, that's home to Jim Jones. That's home to the Greenfield Ranch. That's home to Ukiah. That's where Jim Jones was the foreman of the grand jury in Ukiah for Mendocino County, which included Cabot Cove, which is not Cabot Cove. It's the Ambien River, and it's Mendocino. And that's a CIA colony, people. It has always been a CIA colony. After Jim Jones, was there, then they sent Charlie Manson and Susan Atkins and Mary Bruner and Patricia Kronwinkel were sent up to Philo and Ukiah, which is not that far away from where the Angela Lansbury setup was on the coast. And then after Jonestown was created and People's Temple was moved away from Mendocino to San Francisco to French Guiana into a CIA colony up the river with its own pharmacy and paramilitary security force, then they move Leonard Lake into town, and he goes on a spree where he kills 25 people. It's always cracks me up that people be interested in Son of Sam or even Zodiac, because those crimes are like child's play compared to the real stuff. I mean, the real stuff is the My Lai Massacre. That's 504 people. The real stuff is Jonestown. That's over 900 dead people in 24 hours. The real stuff is the political assassinations. The real stuff is Leonard Lake, who nobody even talks about him. That's 25 people that went missing, and they have body evidence on 11 people. But you have 14 unidentified missing people, but they have their identifications. They've got their driver's licenses, and it's all in possession of Leonard Lake and Charles Ng, who are both United States Marines. They're both United States Marines that went wackadoodle. Just like Manchurian Candidate, just like John Frankenheimer's film that Angela Lansbury was in. And then Angela Lansbury, she sets up shop in Mendocino at the same time Leonard Lake is there. Leonard Lake was there in 1984. Okay? He wasn't rounded up until 1985. So, I mean, I realize he moved over to Woolseyville, which is home to Mark Twain and the Leaping Frogs of Calaveras County, right? Calaveras County, from Mendocino County to Calaveras County, the Leaping Frogs of Mark Twain. That's where Leonard Lake leaped over to, just as Angela Lansbury was leaping in. So Angela Lansbury is completely controlled by the clandestine services. Her daughter Deetra was part of the Manson girls, which they weren't called the Manson girls when that was going on. That was in 1970 that they were recast as the Manson girls. But in the 1969 year, when it was happening, they weren't the Manson girls, because Charlie Manson's a guy who's unemployed with no bank account and no money and no job. So he's not in charge of anything. Basic rule is, if you don't have any money and you don't have a bank account, you cannot be a cult leader. That's why the CIA is always the cult leader. They're the cult leader of the Process Church. They're the cult leader of the Church of Scientology. They're the cult leader of the Church of Set. They would be in charge of Michael Aquino. Michael Aquino is not in charge. Jim Jones is not in charge. Charlie Manson is not in charge. Okay? Those are the scapegoats. Lee Oswald is not in charge of the activities in Dallas. Not in charge. It's the military cabal. And if you don't believe me, go back and watch the John Frankenheimer documentaries, Manchurian Candidate, 1962, and The 7 Days of May, 1964. The CIA told you what the program was. It's right there. Go check it out. Thanks for listening. Take care. Have a great day.